News, and this is the Freedom Side. I'm your host, Eugene Puryear. Welcome. Very to have you with us here back on Thursdays. Thanks again to everyone who watched our special show on Judas and the Black Messiah last Friday, but we are back 8 p.m. Eastern Standard Time on Thursdays here on the Freedom Side on Breakthrough News. So very great show that we always have a fantastic show for you. We're going to be talking to Tenant organizers out of Los Angeles. We've got Mariah Parker, the Athens County Commissioner, who's going to be on with us as well. We're going to be going straight to the heart of a story that I know that many of us are following, which is the just unbelievable devastation through this cold snap that has hit Texas, among many other states. Very, very hard. Several dozen people have died, unfortunately, but the cold goes on. Power is still out. We're going to be speaking about that with an organizer directly on the ground there in Dallas. And we're also going to be discussing the ongoing uprising in Haiti. But also, in addition to that, this concomitant crisis, if you will, of deportations of Haitian immigrants that are happening, including babies, by the way, that are happening right now, essentially here in the United States and in the midst of everything that is happening in Haiti right now, where there's an uprising against a dictator. So we're going to get into all that, from Haiti to tenant organizing in LA, to things going on in Athens, Georgia, to what's happening in Texas. But before we get to any of those fantastic and important topics, as we always do, we want to take a quick second to remind you, just take this time and hit that share button so that everybody who is following you can follow us wherever you may be watching us here on our stream. So just take a second, quickly, hit that share button. Just wanted to give you a second there in case you had looked down. Anyway, thank you so much for sharing. Thank you so much for joining. Want to check in briefly with our man Juan in the booth. Juan, how you feeling?
My mic is not even on.
I could hear you though, so I was okay with it.
It's funny, we've been doing like Zoom and like online stuff for a minute, and still we be forgetting to unmute ourselves. I'm talking as a third person. I'm feeling good. Despite the snow and the cold, I'm excited for the show. A lot of important stories, a lot of important guests.
Yeah, no, absolutely, absolutely. Well, let's just jump right into it. We want to bring on Marissa Rodriguez, who's an organizer with the Party for Socialism and Liberation in Dallas, Texas. Marissa, thank you so much for being with us.
Give me 1 second.
No problem at all. I think this is one of those stories that we hadn't even originally planned, of course, at the start of this week when we started thinking about it. And then you see this incredible devastation that has happened here, the unbelievable disassembling of the political leadership in Texas, trying to blame the Green New Deal for the reason the power is off, everyone but themselves, of course. And on the Punch Out, which is our podcast that we do here daily at 5 p.m. Eastern, anywhere where you find your podcast, we actually spoke about this yesterday. Just quick aside, it was not frozen wind turbines. So for whatever reason you're watching Fox News and you think, yes, frozen wind turbines somehow had something to do in Texas, just want to let you know that in fact it had nothing to do with it. 90% of the power that they were using when the lights went out, so to speak, was from natural gas, coal, and nuclear energy sources. And at least what they say, the power company, is that at those power plants that the various instruments froze, there was also a shortage of natural gas, which actually often happens in cold winters because people use it for heating oil, but that ultimately is the issue. There's no issue that somehow wind turbines failed and all of Texas all of a sudden did not have heat. 90%, just to reiterate, of the power that was being used was coal, nuclear, and natural gas, not wind. One quick final thing I'll put in there, wind energy on the day the power went out was actually higher than any of the forecasts of where it would be 5 months. So it was actually more wind energy being produced rather than less. At the same time, they were saying this is the culprit. So we want to move here to hear more about what is really happening on the ground there in Texas. Do we have Marissa now? We do. Marissa, thank you so much for joining us.
Hey, thanks so much for having me.
No, the pleasure is all ours. Maybe just to start, what is the situation there for you now in Dallas and in Texas? Are people still without power, heat? What's going on?
Yeah, so when I woke up this morning, I was seeing, thankfully, more posts, more updates from friends and neighbors that some power has been restored. Tonight, at least in North Texas, we're expecting another night of freezing temperatures. So it's, um, the temperatures are not quite where they need to be. People still are in freezing conditions, though that has started to turn around just a little bit,
One of the things
thankfully.
I'm curious about is what has been the response so far from the government on the ground, from the authorities? I mean, I see a lot of finger pointing, but I'm wondering if they're actually accomplish anything.
Yeah, finger pointing is exactly what's happening. Everybody learned number one thing Googled in Texas must have been what the heck is ERCOT, because nobody. I mean, I don't think most people even knew that we were on our own power grid. Like, why would we know that unless your work or career is like in energy or something. So most people don't realize that as consumers, like we don't even have that knowledge that we're like on a separate power grid from the rest of the entire country. So when people started to realize, like, oh, who this ERCOT company, like they need to kind of answer for what happened. ERCOT is now pointing the finger at Encore, saying, "Well, Encore didn't winterize their equipment." So it's Encore's fault, right? So it's just a bunch of finger pointing. Governor Abbott, as far as I understand, it took way too long, in my opinion, for a state of emergency to even be declared. I mean, we knew this weather was coming. He could have done that ahead of time. There's a lot of this, why weren't we prepared? We had some kind of foreknowledge or forewarning or indication that there was going to be below freezing temperatures, even sub-zero temperatures,
Hmm.
and it's like nothing was done.
Nothing happening at all. It's interesting to me. You mentioned about the state of emergency, and one of the things that I've seen a lot is that people were saying, well, their lights go out, they have no heat, but they couldn't really get answers at first, and people didn't even really know what was going on. What were those first few hours like when the power went down?
Well, first of all, it happened in the middle of the night. So I am kind of a up all night type person, and I started to see posts at like 2 a.m. People are
Mm.
like, my power's out. Like it's freezing, and my power just went out. And then people reassuring each other, oh, it's just a rolling blackout. It'll just be 15 minutes up to 45 minutes. So then, again, you wake up the next morning and people are like, I had no power all night. I froze all night. I'm a popsicle now. And then, we started to realize these rolling blackouts weren't rolling at all. They were just blackouts. And then the horror stories just started to pile on and pile on. And so those first few hours, I mean, I've seen a lot of people report just feeling really exhausted, just
Mm.
emotionally and mentally, just from having to kind of deal with, even if your lights are on, your neighbors, your family, the people you care about and love, their lights are not on. There's nothing we can do to really, like, the road conditions are awful. We can't really hop in our cars and go get grandma. It's really, really just been a toll on everybody.
Hmm. And in terms of the humanitarian situation, one of the things I'm also curious about that I've seen is that a lot of stores ultimately had to close as well. Have there been challenges that you've seen or encountered or heard of with people getting food or different things like that?
Yeah, so I know that there are mutual aid organizations that are definitely doing the incredible work of getting food and care packages together and delivering those to people, um, in the place of our government who is not doing that at all. And I'm also seeing footage of grocery stores just completely wiped out. Um, I think it's difficult for transport vehicles to even get fresh food to the grocery stores. There's, talk of fuel being low.
Mm.
So it's a scary situation. I mean, people kind of ran to the stores in the beginning, but for those who weren't able to make that or couldn't get there or whatever, at this point in the storm, in the week, the grocery stores are, I mean, they're just empty.
Yeah, yeah. One of the things I've been seeing from a lot of local officials and some state officials in Texas is they're asking people to sacrifice now run your heat low, do these different things, which I'm sure makes sense in the big scheme of things. But then I've seen these amazing photos from Austin. I don't know if the same thing is happening in Dallas or in Houston where, the lights are out, especially in poor black and brown neighborhoods, but then you can see the skyline of downtown and the buildings are all still lit up. I mean, it feels like there's quite a double standard on who's being asked to sacrifice.
Absolutely. That is, I mean, in here in Dallas, kind of one of the first questions I started getting asked was, what about the park cities? The park cities and Preston Hollow. Preston Hollow is where George Bush lives. So just to kind of give you an idea of like what kind of neighborhood that is, their lights are on. People were taking videos of driving through these neighborhoods and, oh, that person's got their TV on. And that, I had in neighborhood groups, people are reporting some folks just have their whole lights on, almost like they're, rubbing it in our faces or something. So there is a discrepancy. Downtown in Dallas was also lit up. And you can't help but notice these things.
I think people outside Texas, I don't know what people know about Texas, so let me not generalize, but, I don't know if people get the full impact, and seeing people like Governor Abbott, on all the television and different pieces like that, say, oh, it's not my fault, it is what it is. But, I mean, it seems to me that it's important to contextualize here that it's not as if these people care about people normally, right? Like, it's not like, I mean, obviously it's terrible, but it doesn't seem like it's that big of a surprise that the Abbotts, the Dan Patricks of the world would not only be unprepared, but not be helping people.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, we've seen that bear itself out over the last 10 months, right? With the coronavirus and the pandemic. So over the last 10 months, where's the care for human life? I mean, I think one thing people do know about the state of Texas is the repressive and backwards, pro-life stuff that goes on here and attacks on reproductive health. And, it's this crazy double standard of, you're pro-life, but are you really? Because there's people that need help. And where is that help? Mm-hmm. We don't know.
Well, I think the big news today is the senator from Texas, Ted Cruz. He was in Cancun. He has his own explanation for what he was doing there, but it does seem that he and his family fled to Cancun as soon as they realized they weren't going to have any lights, any heat. How are you reacting to that, and how are people reacting to that, Marissa?
Oh boy. So that there is a lot of frustration. I'll just say that there's a lot of frustration. There's a lot of just kind of does not compute. Like, you're seriously telling me this man was on a beach with his family while people are starving, freezing, using camping tools to just get through the day. And it's just kind of one of those, how do you justify that? I don't know. But people are they're pitchfork ready, I think, some of these folks.
I mean, it's hard not to be when you see the ridiculousness of it, and then the explanation that his daughters were going on a trip with their friends and he had to take them down there. I mean, whoever thought, I guess they earned their money, whoever thought that up. Well, important issues, crucial issues. I appreciate you giving us that context, Marissa, about what's going on there in Texas. Stick with us here for a second, because since I just mentioned Ted Cruz, we're going to make a slight pivot here as we move the show forward, because if I'm mentioning one terrible right-winger, I guess I should mention another. Rush Limbaugh, of course, passed yesterday. I believe he was 70 years old, died of lung cancer. There is many things that could be said about Ted Cruz, but Juan, in the booth, I believe you have compiled some of the I don't know what to call them, lowlights perhaps of his career. There's a lot of anger for people who don't know amongst Republicans who feel, well, no one's giving him a chance. They're not talking about the good things about Rush Limbaugh. All these liberals, all these other people, they're criticizing him. It's so terrible. He just died, as if he ever cared about anything like this. So I want to tee some of these up, bring some of these up, and just to give people a sense of what is really, who this person really was. I mean, Assuming that many people who have watching this probably think he's a bad person, but didn't spend a lot of time listening to his radio show. So, Juan, let's bring up the first excerpt we have here.
All right.
A little history lesson for you. If any race of people should not have guilt about slavery, it's Caucasians.
They have discovered that Obama does have slave blood.
So, nigga with an A on the end. Well, I think I can now. Isn't that the point? Because it's not racist. That's the point. I could be talking about a male. I could be a Chinese male.
Well, it's a good point. You know how to stop abortion? Require that each one occur with a gun.
In this country, that sounds like a hate crime. That Trayvon Martin starts pummeling Zimmerman.
You don't have the right to protest. You're allowed no demonstrations, no foreign flag waving, no political organizing, no bad-mouthing our president or his policies. You're a foreigner. Shut your mouth or get out. And if you come here illegally, you're going to jail.
How many of you guys, in your own experience with women, have learned that no means yes if you know how to spot it?
Meanwhile, Al Sharpton goes out the front door.
Yes, I spoke a little Negro dialect there. I can do that when I want to.
I think that's enough.
Wow. I mean, some of those I had never even heard of before. Some of them I had seen, but part of the reason I wanted to keep you on, Marissa, is as someone who is in a state where so much of this right-wing culture is like permeated everywhere. The idea that somehow we owe these people some level of, grace when they die, given their policies, just seems so absurd to me.
Oh, it's absolutely absurd. I mean, most of my friends are celebrating. So I've heard things that were disgusting before that he said and did, but yeah, some of those things were just like, I'm trying not to run out of the room. Like, oh my God.
Juan, you had to compile these. What was it like having to, and thank you for taking on this mission, even go look for these and just search through hours of Rush Limbaugh?
Did I do something wrong? Because I feel like that was a punishment.
Maybe.
Yeah, Rush Limbaugh is definitely. Are we cursing?
At this point, go ahead.
He's a piece of shit. I mean, like, honestly, I think it's very simple. I've seen a lot of like even liberal outlets talking about his his contributions. Like, he's a racist. He's a racist. He's a bigot. He's a sexist. He's a homophobe. Any opportunity that he had to prove that he's a sexist, he's a bigot, he's a homophobe, he's a misogynist. Like, he did it, and that's not somebody's life that we should be honoring.
Absolutely I think that's 100% true. We just wanted to remind the world briefly, who Rush Limbaugh really was, for all the crocodile tears that are being cried. Marissa Rodriguez, organizer with the Party for Socialism and Liberation in Dallas. Really appreciate you joining us here on the show. Please stay safe and stay warm.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Absolutely. Have a great one. So we are going to keep the movement moving on, as they say. We want to switch gears here and talk a little bit about tenant organizing, specifically in Los Angeles, but I think there's a lot that can be said from all these examples about really the whole country. And we are very, very honored as we continue the show to be joined by Kenia Alcocer, who is an organizer with Union de Vecinos. That's the East Side local of the LA Tenants Union, also a coordinating member of the Poor People's Campaign out in California. And then also Pea Nuñez, who's a filmmaker and an organizer with the Rapid Response Network of Union de Vecinos. Thank you both so much for being with us here on the show.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you.
No, well, the pleasure is all ours. Absolutely very happy to have you joining. Kenia, let me start with you here. I think one of the questions that people often are wondering in this moment is what is really going on with people? What is it really like? What is the situation for tenants? I think people hear there's an eviction moratorium. They think maybe things are fine. What's really going on with the people you're working with and talking to?
Well, just to start off, before the pandemic, we were having a housing crisis here in the state of California. So this is COVID has only aggravated the issue. Um, Before COVID, in Boyle Heights and in East Los Angeles, we were going through a gentrification process where people were being evicted, people were being pushed out, and we were practically being displaced from this community to the outers of LA, to the outskirts of LA. So when COVID hit, there was a need to protect tenants, but we knew that there were certain areas in Los Angeles where tenants were going to be more vulnerable. Boyle Heights, South Central, in the San Fernando Valley, like Silmar, these are poor neighborhoods that have been ignored for such a long time that people are really getting, developers are coming in and evicting people. Landlords are trying to sell their property. So they'll use any technique and lie to push tenants out. To the point where we had landlords that were actually refusing to do repairs that were necessary for people to actually stay in home and ride this pandemic through. So for us on the ground, this means that our the first response we had when the pandemic hit was on April 1st, declare the rent strike. We as a community talked about what we needed to survive this pandemic and decided that rent shouldn't be a priority, that food and shelter and medication and things that would allow us to survive this pandemic were going to be the priority.
Hey, one question I have, just even seeing that you all have a rapid response network, is the implication that, people are getting pushed out pretty much, immediately and need help right away. I was hoping you could talk a little bit about some of the organizing you're doing along that front and some of what you've seen.
Yeah, absolutely. When the rent strike started, there needed to be a contingency plan, right? Like figuring out what's going to happen, how are tenants going to fight back if there's any responses from the landlords are, aggressive, and there was. So as part of the rapid response team, we really mobilized to figure out a list of people that we could at any time, call and be like, hey, can you show up? And that happened multiple times, right? Where we had tenants who were like sometimes physically abused by their landlords, and we as a community needed to show up. Sometimes it wasn't really evictions. Like in East LA, it hasn't really been evictions. It's been more like harassment. In Hollywood, there's been a lot of evictions, illegal evictions, right? And there is a moratorium, but landlords are still figuring out ways to work around it. And we needed to figure out how to be available and be ready whenever those actions will happen. So each of us has a network of 10 people at least to call upon and be ready to go. And we have been able to send the message that we are united as a community, as neighbors, and that these tenants are not alone. So landlords get the message that they need to respect the tenants' rights.
I think that's such an important question, because as you were raising earlier, the issue of landlords doing whatever they want, right, and pushing people out and it seems, I guess the way a lot of people might think about it, right, is that, well, there's a legal process and there's all these other elements, but it seems like the landlords have by far, not that there aren't legal remedies, but their ability to just push someone out right away gives them a huge amount of leverage and of power that can only really be countered by community. Kenia, can you talk about that?
Yes, I mean, one of the things that we're organizing with different organizations across the board, one of them, it's Public Counsel, which is actually putting a lawsuit against the courts. We feel that when there is an order to stay at home, there shouldn't be any court processes happening at the same time where they're evicting people. We've been fighting back against the sheriff's department specifically because they're the ones that carry out the order to lock out people. the LA Tenants Union has been successful in pushing back against the sheriffs. People show up and people push back, but there shouldn't be a reason why we need to continue to expose our health and ourselves to this virus, when they can do the simple thing of just not evicting anybody in this moment. We have a growing community of unhoused people already, that are on the streets that need to be housed. And the focus should be to ensure that people have somewhere to stay, somewhere to live in while we are still dealing with the pandemic. California has been an epicenter after Thanksgiving of this horrible disease, or virus, and nobody is doing anything about it. And this is something that we need to continue to organize and push against. One of the things I do want to say is that a lot of the things that are happening today, like the rent moratoriums, like the ability for the state to pay the tenants' debt, are things that we were asking before this pandemic. And the ability of the government to actually provide this shows us that there was no political will before. There was no political will during. And now that we're continuing to organize and push, now there's some political will, which means that housing is a human right and it could be protected as such if there was political will from the Democratic Party here in the state of California.
Well, I'd certainly be curious both your thoughts on this next question, but Pea, I'll start with you. I mean, does some of this, because I think Kenia's point is so well taken that, we had a housing crisis before this. Does some of what's happening in the crisis with landlords trying to push tenants out, harass tenants, feel potentially connected to gentrification efforts? Like they're feeling if we can get as many people out now, it'll help us in the future?
Absolutely. You're on the money on that. That's the case. And unfortunately, for a very brief period, rents in LA went down when there was like a sort of an exodus, right? Like people were like, well, I don't have to be in LA to work. I can work remotely. So a lot of people left LA to buy houses, right? And now there were a lot of empty, and there is already a lot of empty apartments and houses in California and LA, but there was more so. But now the rents have gone back to normal, and if anything, they're going up again, and so there is a connection. Absolutely. I would say that landlords are seeing this as an opportunity to continue to profit more.
Kenia, I'm curious your thoughts about some of the same questions. I mean, even some of the communities that you mentioned at the outset, like Boyle Heights and others. I mean, obviously I'm on the East Coast, but I've been seeing for years that obviously they've been targeted by these developers.
Yes, I mean, we're seeing a huge increase on spending when it comes to real estate. The actual prices of homes haven't gone down even with the pandemic. I mean, people are buying and selling like crazy right now. And that's one of the things that we've been noticing in our neighborhoods. These developers that have been trying to do projects for years that didn't have the money before are getting financed to do these projects now because they want to stimulate the economy, quote unquote. I would say that, but in reality, this is one of the things that we're pushing back against. We're seeing the need to push back against these developers, these landlords, but also against the city. City planning is giving a lot of these permits. I mean, one of the things that we're seeing, it's more and more property being LS Act, which means is that it's being taken out of the rental market rate, but in reality, it's not. Landlords are lying in some of those applications, kicking tenants out, and then they go back and renting those units for triple of what they were renting them before. So we're seeing a lot of scams happening. This was happening before the pandemic. It's still happening now. And that's one of the things that we're being more vigilant. And thanks to the rapid response network that has been created, we've been able to identify those landlords. There's landlords that own property across the city of LA. And sometimes we're fighting them individually as a local, and now we're being more strategic of fighting them together and targeting developers and landlords.
One thing I'm wondering, Pea, is maybe this is a loaded question, but what are the local politicians saying? I mean, it just seems like all of this seems so scandalous, and maybe I'm just being naive here, but are they standing with the landlords, saying nothing? What's happening on that front?
one of the most recent conversations that took place was last week it was about house people in El Sereno. So Kevin De Leon, recently now in office, one of the things, I mean, everybody's saying like, yeah, there's an issue, it's a big problem. It has been a problem. Homelessness has been a problem. And yeah, they say all these things, but their solutions are just band-aids, honestly. Like, it's just like, oh, let's spend all this money to buy this hotel to temporarily house the unhouses. No, that's not a solution. That's just temporary, and we need more. We need homes, not shelters. That's what we need. And that's what we keep hearing is like, oh yeah, we have all these plans, to house them temporarily. But the unhoused issue is going to continue if there's no permanent housing for people and affordable. That's the big issue here is that, yeah, there is a lot of housing, but there is a lot of priority for landlords to make more profits, but not for tenants to live in a home.
Mm-hmm. Kenia, it all seems to underscore to me everything we've talked about here tonight, the importance of organization. Obviously, the landlords are organized and very powerful. Talk about, maybe not just during this pandemic, but in your tenure as doing housing organizing, how important it is really for communities to stay organized.
It's very important. And I think one of the things that we've seen is that this pandemic has allowed for a lot of the nonprofits to really push for what they felt that it wasn't feasible before. So it's actually radicalizing a lot of community members to push their organizations to actually push for more and better solutions towards the housing issue. And I think that that's something that it's very important to highlight. And organizing means that you are not alone fighting this. And I think that that's something that's very, very important. As we're moving closer, for example, to the International Women's Day, we have a lot of single mothers that are facing landlords by themselves. And now they know that there's a place and there's an organization where they don't have to do that. I think that this is something that for us is important. If you're undocumented, if you're a person of color and feel that you're being harassed, like there is space in tenant organizing where we're not just talking about saving your homes, we're actually talking about projects of survival. We have a rapid response network, but we also have mutual aid help where we're helping each other with food distribution. I mean, this is a political home too, where you can learn how to politicize yourself and how to work towards finding liberation and true liberation. It's not just about housing, it's about healthcare. It's about having a dignified life.
And before I let you all go, I'm sure people watching this might be wanting to connect. How can they connect with this work, find out what you're doing?
Yeah, they can go to latu.org and look for your most close local here in the city of LA. We're also part of actually ATUN, which is the National Tenants Union. If you go to ATUN, search for ATUN on Google. And if you're anywhere in the part of the country, like we're uniting as tenants, and tenant unions are uniting across the country to make sure that there's a better push. And when you were mentioning politicians, I mean, here the local politicians are passing the ball to the governor. The governor is passing the ball to the federal government. So we're not just organizing locally, we're organizing statewide, and we're organizing nationally now to make sure that tenants get the respect that they deserve.
Right on. Pea, Kenia, you guys are all doing great work. Really appreciate you joining us here on the Freedom Side.
Thank you.
Well, we're going to keep the movement moving forward, but before we do, if you just tuned in, take a quick second here, hit that share button. We've got plenty of fantastic things left in the show, and we want everyone who follows you to be able to follow us. So go ahead, hit that share button, and we will keep moving the show forward here. Very excited to be as we continue the show by Mariah Parker, who is a commissioner down in Athens, Georgia, also a rapper, also a PhD student, also an organizer. There's many superlatives I'm sure I could continue to throw on here, but maybe what's more important is that we bring her into the show. Really, really happy that you're able to join us, Mariah.
Thanks for having me. It's a pleasure to be here. It's good
No,
to see
the
you
pleasure
again.
is all ours. The pleasure is all ours. I wanted to start here with a story I just saw that seems particularly relevant to me this week because I think it was yesterday, in fact, in Congress, there was the hearing on H.R. 40, the bill that would study reparations. And in some of the work that you've been working on there in Athens, there was also what I would consider a relatively major admission that came from the commission there in Athens, apologizing and recognizing what, in my view, can only really be called as a terroristic sort of act, what happened there in Lennon in the 1960s. Maybe the best place to start is if you could give us some context for what actually took place, and then I think I'd like to move into some of what happened this week.
Sure. So in the 1960s, the University of Georgia conspired with the city of Athens and several legislators at the state and federal level to use eminent domain to destroy a Black neighborhood that was located pretty centrally in town as one of the smallest, or one of the strongest, but smallest enclaves of Black home ownership at the time, in a place where restrictive covenants still made it such that folks couldn't buy properties in these white neighborhoods. They came together and, working class Black folks were able to build a community. However, under urban renewal and in the interest of slum clearance, as they said, they moved people out through controlled fires, through intimidation, through all manner of white supremacist terroristic tactics, displaced these families. And many of these families unraveled in the aftermath of having their homes seized and their community torn apart. And so one of the families that lived in Lennon was able to move their house rather than see it burned to the ground before them, like a lot of folks who were living in Lennon at the time, moved their house across town into my district that I represent in the east side of Athens. And one of my constituents, 2 years ago, came to me and told me this story. And ever since then, we've been trying to connect with other descendants of Lennon, other former residents who were children in the 1960s and are now, in their 60s and 70s, to get this story out and also understand what redress and recognition could look like on their terms. And so a year ago, I introduced a resolution calling for the University of Georgia to partner with the city of Athens, not only apologize for the taking and the destruction of Lennon, but offer reparations in the form of participatory budgeting, of actual wealth redistribution to the families who's lost that generational wealth with their homes being taken from them, and other measures to help heal those who suffered considerable trauma as a result of this conspiracy. At the time, it was rejected by the Athens Clarke County Commission, but after a year of working with our attorneys, working with community organizers, doing a reparational audit to understand how much generational wealth was lost, figuring out within the confines of the Georgia State Constitution how we could get material redress for the losses these people suffered, we were able to pass the first act of reparations in the state of Georgia on Tuesday that grants participatory budgeting powers to the Lennon Committee, the descendants that who were impacted by the erasure of their neighborhood and of their homes in the 1960s. And so they are the only committee in the local government that can give direct recommendations on how we spend our money in the community in order to see that we have housing justice for future generations of Black Athenians, to see that other compounding issues of poverty, of income inequality, of lack of social services are redressed such that our communities moving forward are whole. And so it's been one of my greatest honors as an organizer to work with these folks, to learn from these folks, these elders in our community that went through this, and we have a lot of work to do from here. But I'm taking a little second to celebrate. It feels good.
I think you should take a second to celebrate. I mean, it feels, I'm not even from Athens, and it feels great to me. I mean, it really spoke to me. I'm from Charlottesville, Virginia, another southern college town, supposedly liberal. And it just blew my mind because they did the same thing in Vinegar Hill at almost the same time, maybe 10 years earlier, same playbook. And you just see the impact over so many years of the things that have been done to Black America. And that's one thing I maybe wonder about just going through this whole process for you. What are you reflecting on in terms of how we're addressing the issue of reparations in general? I mean, now it's coming up again before Congress, and I don't know if they will pass H.R. 40. Perhaps they will. I don't know what we'll get by that. But I think the conversation about what it could look like, what it should be, and the importance of reparations is now back in the, maybe to some degree, in the public eye. So I just wonder, having gone through this, how you're now sort of reflecting on the maybe broader process that I think all of us in Black America are consistently thinking about for the right reasons.
Yeah, definitely. As we navigated this process and bumped up against some of the limitations put on us by the Georgia State Constitution, we have a clause in it called the Gratuities Clause that prevents us as a local government from giving direct money to private citizens. So like right now in coronavirus, we're not able to give STEMI checks like the federal government can because of the Gratuities Clause. And so our only recourse was to give these folks the power to help shape the way we spend our money on public goods. And so our investments in affordable housing, our investments in infrastructure like municipal broadband, our investment in social services, our investment in youth development and education programs. And so when we talk about like what reparations can look like, I think this is an interesting and informative process for us, because while it would be great to give these folks the wealth that was taken from them, ultimately that in a sense prioritizes the private accumulation of capital and the continuation of capitalism, which is not something I personally am interested in. And so thinking about how reparations can also take the form of a reallocation and a reinvestment into communities that have been historically underfunded as a matter of white supremacy, as another way to go about that. I think the question has been asked often, what can reparations look like? And I think we have provided a model, at least at the local level here, of something that could be done nationally, perhaps in tandem with actual checks in the bank for folks to go out and buy a house or put down payment, on a car or get that education that's been holding them back. And so we are pushing as our next steps to have the Georgia State Legislature create an authority and like a committee of some sort to think about what reparations can look like as a state, and perhaps carve out some leeway within the Georgia State Constitution to provide opportunity for us to do that material redress to the private individuals whose lives were ruined by urban renewal. But I think of those things working together might be a really interesting recipe for how reparations could play out at larger scales than the local. But for now, we are pleased with the work that we have done to see those communities reinvested in as a way of righting the wrongs that were done to them in decades past.
And as a commissioner, I think this is a really interesting initiative in many different ways. And it makes me also wonder, as someone else who also does not want to see capitalism strengthened, I think a lot of times when people are thinking about elected office, elected officials, people who are critical of capitalism, let me put it that way, there's a lot of focus on the limitations, which is right and real and relevant and important. But I'm wondering also how you're reflecting on the role that someone can play that has, what I would call, let's say, non-sellout proclivities, somebody who's really trying to do the real thing, the role you can play and the things you can do in this kind of role.
Yeah, I mean, some of my proudest accomplishments as a commissioner were honestly the failures that I learned from, but also like in failing, changed the public discourse around certain ideas. And so like using the opportunity of having this platform, of having insiders' knowledge of how the government works and being able to serve as this bridge between radical demands by popular social movements to like the mechanisms of government, and sort of to show how these things can go from the ideal into the concrete, using that station to enliven conversations around what we as communities deserve. What is possible within local government, and like dreaming higher and bigger about what sorts of things can come from civic engagement. And so I try to use it as much as I can, knowing that planting that seed today of changing the way we think about things like police abolition or social housing, and the right to a fair living for every single person, no matter you work 40 hours a week and we don't work at all. Putting those ideas into the public discourse as a politician, 10 years from now, who knows how mainstreamed that idea might become in our community? Who knows what we might be talking about if that becomes normalized? Like, what new envelopes can we push with regards to not only how we talk about what we can do it for our community, but what we do, how that translates to actual policy. And so that's what I try to do outside, recognizing the lack of political will at times when comparing myself with some of my colleagues to do things like defund the police, knowing that pushing that conversation forward, using the power that I have as an elected official is still getting the ball rolling towards the policy prescriptions that our moment desperately calls for.
No, I think that's a critically important point, and I just wonder, maybe in the time that you have been a commissioner, how have you seen things shift in terms of consciousness? Obviously, quite a bit has happened in terms of the world itself.
I mean, I've seen a shift in the way that we as a government conceive our relationship to popular movements, creating new avenues for the public to engage in things like our budgeting processes, in collaboratively crafting policy and things like this that just didn't happen before, because there was this deeply ingrained divide between those who felt empowered and entitled to that kind of power and those that had to live the consequences of the policy that came from that. And so that shift, I think, has been really productive, and I hope to see it continue, to see a more activist form of government, and not simply one that is reactionary, responding to the failures of old, but like actually thinking forward with regards to what's possible, what we can get done, and working hand in hand with the folks that we represent to craft solutions rather than prescribe them to folks whose experience we don't understand.
One thing I want to also ask you, last week we had a special show. We were talking about Judas and the Black Messiah. You are also working in the cultural field. I mean, certainly you can tell me anything about the movie if you want to comment on it, but I'm also just curious your thoughts about the use of culture, especially in terms of engaging young people and the interaction between, they say, well, I don't know who says this. Someone said it. It might actually be someone bad, so don't hold it to me, but politics is downstream of culture. And so I just wonder also some of your observations about how these two lanes can work together.
Yeah, I mean, as a hip hop artist, particularly in the pandemic, I wasn't as highly politicized when I started making music, but particularly during lockdown, where I'm not on tour anymore, I've been using the pen for popular political education more and more to educate my Instagram following, or people who I do a little live stream show for, or whoever, about the importance of how we make change through a general strike, or the importance of supporting striking workers, of debt abolition and debt cancellation as a way to also push for the provision of more public goods, free higher education, free healthcare, things like this. So using music as a way to entice people into conversation around not only public policy, but organizing and what that can look like in our communities. For folks that are just like, yo, the beat's dope and she's got bars, like that's ill. And then on their third or fourth listen, I'm like, oh, wait, you mean to tell me in like Denmark and South Korea, they gave everybody UBI during the pandemic and we ain't get shit? Like, maybe we should do that general strike thing she was talking about. So I think that the way that hip hop in particular operates through cadence, through repetition, through rhyme, through illusion, in a way that draws you in and requires multiple listens for you to sort of draw out the salient themes, I think is what I try to exploit in trying to transmit these messages to people about the importance of organizing and about public policy demands, I think, in the moment that we're in.
Well, I can only say right on to that. I appreciate that. I definitely appreciate everything that you're doing politically, culturally. I really appreciate you for joining us here on the show. I have seen you maybe think about running for Congress, so I'm excited to hear that as well, but really just appreciate you on so many levels. Thank you for joining us here on the Freedom Side, Mariah.
Pleasure to be with you. Thanks so much for your time.
Pleasure is all ours. Juan in the booth. Before we move on, you have something you want to bring to my attention? I'm always a little afraid. Let's see what we have here.
No reason to fear, Eugene. No reason to fear. Breaking news at Breakthrough News. We have a Ted Cruz statement about his trip in his trip in Mexico.
What did he say? What is this?
I don't know. We had to decode it.
Oh, sorry, I had to look to my right. We have the TV. For people who don't understand, well, I don't know why you want to explain.
I don't want to explain. We also have a picture of Ted Cruz
Oh Lord, here we go.
in
I
Mexico.
gotta see this.
This is a drawing and a picture of Ted Cruz in Mexico.
I appreciate that, Juan. For those who don't know, many have noted that Ted Cruz seems to look surprisingly like the Zodiac Killer. Not making any comments on whether he is, whether he isn't, just saying he was there. I guess I'm taking a page out of Trump's book. I'm not saying it. Other people are saying it. What was his dad doing with Lee Harvey Oswald? I'm sorry. I can't. Ted Cruz. Apparently, he just was taking his kids to, I mean, this is the most unbelievable story I've ever heard. So the power goes out, the heat goes out. Apparently his daughter's out of nowhere like, hey, our friends are going to Cancun. Can we go there on a trip? He takes what appears to be a bag for 6 days to just take them overnight and flies back. I don't know who came up with that, but that's your
It's insane. It's insane. I feel like at this point, like anyone who liked Ted Cruz, I don't know who those people are. Maybe fans of the Zodiac Killer. Anybody who had any like for Ted Cruz, like needs to like realize like this is a horrible person. He tried to play it off, but it was not happening. He said I was bringing my daughter down,
and then he had the nerve to be taking Economy Plus back. I mean, at least sit in a regular seat. I mean,
Eugene, don't hate the hustle, hate the game.
I mean, you can't knock the hustle, I guess. I mean, he's getting free health care out of it. Many people do not know that. In Congress, they get free health care. So all these people who are like, no health care for everybody else, we don't want any Medicare for all, no government-funded health care, they're all getting government-funded health care. And trust me, it is very good government-funded health care. So just take that hypocrisy as you may. Juan, any other Cruz updates?
That's it.
Well, I appreciate that. We always want to break in. We always want to have breaking news. Take a quick second. If you're still watching, we have another segment. We're going to come in, hit that share button so everyone who's watching you can watch us, because we do want to move to a very, very important issue. The people of Haiti, the Haitian diaspora are both in resistance and under attack. Many things going on from Haiti to the United States on this. So we just want to jump into it right now. Very happy to be joined by Guerline Jozef, who's the founder and executive director of the Haitian Bridge Alliance, also co-founder of the Black Immigrants Bail Fund. And we also have with us Kim Ives, an editor and journalist at the weekly newspaper Haiti Liberté. Thank you both so much for being with us.
Thank you, Eugene.
Well, the pleasure is all ours. Kim, I'll start with you. I think a lot of people have been seeing the massive protest in Haiti. I think many people have been very inspired by it. Obviously, heroic resistance. Do you feel, Kim, is this, it almost feels like a ridiculous question to ask. Is this a flash in the pan? Is this protest movement here to stay? Where are things and where do you see them going in the near term?
Well, we have no crystal ball, but for sure, this is the culmination, really, of the past 10 years of neo-devaluerist rule in Haiti. Just to give the viewers and listeners a quick history, Haiti had a very brutal dictatorship for 30 years, from 1957 to 86, the Duvalier dictatorship. And 35 years ago, on February 7th, the dictator at that time, Jean-Claude Baby Doc Duvalier, fled the country. And that was conceived of as more or less the beginning of the modern Haitian democracy. And there were 5 years of turmoil, coups d'etats, governments coming in, military dictators, etc., which finally culminated on December 16th, 1990, with the election of a liberation theologian priest, Jean-Bertrand Aristide, who was inaugurated 5 years after Jean-Claude left on February 7th, 1991. And thereafter came 20 years of really, we could say, struggle with the empire and with the ruling classes of Haiti. There were 2 coups d'etats 7 months after his initial inauguration on September 30th, 1991. And then he was reelected again in 2000. This is Aristide. And he was overthrown 4 years later on February 29th, 2004. And each of those overthrows was followed by a foreign military occupation by the United Nations. It was basically fomented by the United States, which did the initial intervention each time with France and Canada, its 2 junior partners in Haiti. And in any case, so the result was really 20 years from 1991 till 2011. Jean-Bertrand Aristide, his original prime minister, René Préval, then Jean-Bertrand Aristide and his original prime minister, René Préval, alternated power. But then the earthquake came in 2010. It created an opening for the empire to come in. They basically rigged the election to make sure that Michel Martelly, a vulgar compas musician, would be elected. Neo-devaluerist, he'd been a big cheerleader of both coups d'etats in 1991 and 2004. And he came in through the good graces of then Secretary of State Hillary Clinton, who actually flew in the midst of the Arab Spring to Haiti to read the Riot Act to René Préval, say you got to put in Martelly. Martelly came in, and essentially his regime from 2011 till 2016 was checkered with just huge demonstrations. He came within an inch of being overthrown himself and managed to pass the baton to a transitional government and then to Jovenel Moïse, who is the current president. And Jovenel Moïse had the misfortune of coming into power at the same time as Donald Trump, we could say, because Trump immediately put sanctions on Venezuela, which had been providing Martelly, in fact, with funds through a thing called the Petrocaribe Fund. We can go more into that if we need to. And Jovenel didn't have it, so things started to get even worse under Jovenel. More repression, more corruption, more misery for the people. And that is coming to a head now because on this past February 7th, that is 11 days ago, he was supposed to have stepped down according to the Constitution. The Constitution says it black on white. It says he had to step down, and he didn't. And not only that, now he's trying to rewrite the Constitution so that he can maybe stay a second term, or who knows, maybe like Duvalier for life. So we're watching really the reinstallation of Duvalierism in Haiti, and the Haitian people are not having it.
You know, Guerline, at the same time all this is happening, we've got immigration and customs enforcement here in the United States deporting Haitian people. I mean, seemingly, maybe not even legally. I mean, maybe you can walk us through this. I thought there was a moratorium on deportations. So seeing some of these stories, I've been somewhat shocked, but it just seems more callous and criminal than it already would be in even a normal circumstance. Oh, Guerline, you're muted.
Thank you so much, Eugene. Can you hear me now?
We got you.
Wonderful. So what you said is exactly what it is. And as you just heard about the history and what's been happening in Haiti right now, in the middle of all of that, the United States is deporting Black Haitians, Black immigrants to Haiti. As a matter of fact, the very first thing that the United States did on the very first day of Black History Month, the very first hours of that day, was deporting Haitians to Haiti. But just to give a little bit more context of the relationship between Haiti and the United States from the beginning, understanding that the United States, as the first free country in the Americas, and Haiti is the second and first Black country, in the United States to have fought and won freedom that wasn't given to us. We fought and won that. and understanding because of that, the relationship itself between Haiti and the United States started in a very rocky space, to the point where the United States, for the first 20 years, refused to acknowledge Haiti as a free, independent country. Because understanding, by acknowledging and accepting Haiti as a former Black colony, will then put the idea of Blacks in America, enslaved people in America, that they too can be free. They too can fight for freedom. So therefore, not acknowledging the existence and the freedom and the autonomy of Haiti as a country itself has been the beginning of what we continue to see. You know, accepting for Haiti to pay France after we literally fought and won the war, we had to pay them for lost wages. We literally had to pay France because we fought and abolished slavery. So when we talk about Haiti in the context, we have to understand the history of what Haiti itself represents as a Black, free country is unacceptable to the West. So now we bring it back to now, and we're talking about immigration. We have to understand that the immigration system is rooted in racism. Not only that, but also in anti-Blackness. When we hear about immigration prison, immigration detention, it is a direct extension of the criminal prison that have been caging Black bodies for ever. And also understanding that the immigration prison system itself, the way that we know it today, started with Haitian migrants coming to the United States as a result of what was discussed before. Refugees coming, we had refugees from Cuba and from Haiti coming at the same time. The lighter skinned, the lighter Cubans were preferred over the darker Black Haitians. And they were literally detained and caged in Guantanamo Bay. And we have pictures and stories of what those people went through. And that system is what was used to create the detention immigration prison as we know today. So what we are experiencing is nothing new. You know, the idea of Haiti itself is unacceptable to the West.
Well,
so
Guerline,
to keep...
please go ahead.
Eugene. To keep that in a state of dependency has always been the goal. Now we see the Haitian diaspora in the United States having to deal with the stigma of AIDS carriers in the 1980s, completely dismantle and destroy the Haitian American community because we were unwanted. And creating that, having us lost all of who we are because we did not want to be associated with the stigma. Now we see today, from February 1st to today, over 1,000 Haitians have been deported to Haiti during Black History Month. And Eugene, you mentioned the moratorium from the president, which we welcomed, right? But the reality, it never provided relief for those asylum seekers at the border. It never provided protection from deportation from those people who have been literally on the road running for the past 10 years. Understanding that the majority of the asylum seekers at the border are survivors of the earthquake that happened in Haiti 10 years ago, killing over 250 people that day, leaving millions without anything at all. So those people migrated to Brazil. Some of them migrated to Chile. and some of them even to Venezuela. As the political turmoils are also happening in those countries, the first people to literally feel the weight are the newly arrived Black immigrants, primarily from Haiti, but also from Cameroon and other countries. Understanding that the people who migrated to Chile have to deal with extreme racism and anti-Blackness, literally pushing them out of the country. These are people who are being refused health care. Pregnant women going to hospital about to give birth, they are being returned, and they ended up having their babies in the streets. So they are being forced again to leave Chile, to make their way by foot, leaving Brazil on foot, crossing 10 to 11 borders to come to ask for asylum. And now we see them getting trapped under Title 42 and then getting deported. Not only that, I can share another story with you with a gentleman by the name of Paul Pierre-Ellis, which is a client of Haitian Bridge Alliance. This man's parents left Haiti 50 years ago. They migrated to Saint Martin, the French part, and then they gave birth to him there. They then migrated from St. Martin to the United States when he was 5 years old. The man grew up as an American. He talked as an American. The only difference is that he wasn't born in the United States. Keep in mind that as a person without citizenship in neither St. Martin/France nor Haiti, his only home has been the United States. He has been going through his check-in with Ives, that's what they do, on January the 11th, literally the day before the memorial for the earthquake that I just mentioned. He was detained, imprisoned, and deported to a country he has never been to, a country his parents fled 50 years ago. Right now, as I'm speaking to you, he is in hiding because Haiti agreed in some way, shape, or form to have this man sent to Haiti. And we have experienced that with people who have been born in the Bahamas, where they do not have citizenship just because they were born in that specific country.
Wow.
And we are seeing this happening over and over. The thing that we are experiencing, the things we have been experiencing as Black immigrants in this country. And I tell people that just like our, African American brothers and sisters descended of slaves, which we too are descended of slaves, our citizenship, our piece of paper do not protect us in the Black skin that we are in. Our communities are over-policed. And because of that, when we have a young man in a community where the police is literally on top of them, and they will get arrested for having a joint. And then that will be in the records. And if anything were to happen to them, that will then cause them to be deported after they have served their time.
Wow.
And
I mean,
now
there's so many injustices that I think are laid out there.
Compiling.
Yeah, no, I mean, the list is compiling. I mean, it really, unbelievable stories in some ways, maybe not unbelievable, but certainly outrageous. Kim, I mean, the thing that is really striking to me is just sort of how consistently foreign policy, domestic policy, administration to administration, and I think Guerline spoke to this, that, I mean, it's just hard for me to shake the feeling, Kim, that Haiti and Haitians are really a targeted people when it comes to U.S. policy.
Well, they're the other pole of this hemisphere. The United States, a country founded by slave owners. Haiti, a state founded by self-freed slaves. And so their whole histories, their whole trajectory, Haiti has been the touchstone for the revolutions throughout Latin America at the beginning of the 19th century. It was the Haitians who provided Bolivar and Miranda with the printing presses, the guns, the boats, the soldiers even, to fight the liberation. And in fact, if you look in the flags of all those countries the Haitians had to trek through from Chile or Brazil or Ecuador, wherever they started, you're going to see the Haitian flag. The red and the blue is there with a yellow band on top. Ecuador, Venezuela, Colombia, you name it. And so Haiti was not only the touchstone for those revolutions, but for the pink revolutions, which began really after the election of Jean-Bertrand Aristide in 1990. Hugo Chavez, Evo Morales, Rafael Correa, they said, damn, we could do that too. We could bring the people together. And a pink tide took place across, just like Bolivar's revolutions across Latin America in the 19th century. In the 20th and 21st century, it was the Haitians who led the way. So they've always been targeted as a troublemaking nation. And I think this is part of the targeting of the country. And it must also be said that the election of Martelly and of Jovenel Moïse and the deportations, this happened as much under the Democrats as the Republicans. It wasn't just a Trump problem. As Haiti Liberté, Albert St. Jean, who knows Guerline, I think, and wrote a very interesting piece last week in Haiti Liberté, was explaining what we see happening today under Biden was really a replay of what began in 2016 under Obama, the deporter-in-chief, as we now know. So this is really a policy of the empire to send a message, and that's what they're trying to do, send a message to all those people along the border, the Mexican-U.S. border, to say, you come into the U.S., you're going back. It's essentially a de facto way of telling them that. You know, this is just the velvet glove on the iron fist. Trump, he took the glove off. He was open, but, you know, Biden, Obama, Clinton, they have the temerity to try to put a glove on this iron fist and pretend that they're better. So I think we have to see that the empire's conduct, both in meddling in the internal affairs and then dealing with the refugees that result from that, is just as ruthless as Republicans.
Mm-hmm. No, well, there's a lot there, quite a bit to discuss. We're going to keep following this story. We're coming up close to time tonight. Really appreciate you, Kim Ives, Guerline, Jozef. Thank you so much for joining us here on the Freedom Side.
Thank you for having us.
The pleasure was all ours. And that is going to draw us to a close here on the Freedom Side, back on our regular time this week, 8 p.m. Eastern Standard Time on Thursdays. And we will be back with you next week at 8 p.m. Eastern Standard Time on Thursday. Thanks to everyone who watched here on the Freedom Side. Special thanks to everyone who shared. Don't forget that you can go to patreon.com/breakthrough-news. It's patreon.com/breakthrough-news. Become a patron and help us continue to produce all of the great work that we do here at Breakthrough News. But that will do it for us here tonight on the Freedom Side.